Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, all of you, for being here. We are running way behind schedule, about an hour and a half, so I had prepared a short introduction before we started and launched into the panel discussion, but I'm going to let that be. I'm just going to quote two simple figures, which I think will set the context for what we're about to discuss here. The total trade between India and South Africa last year was about $9.3 billion. $9.3 billion. In 2012, 5 years back, the same number was about $14.7 billion. Over the last 5 years, what this means is that total trade, exports plus imports, between the two countries is down almost 40%. While we can say that recently things have picked up, the rate of, the pace of trade is picking up, but from the peak, we are down almost 40%. We heard the CEOs of Invest India and Invest South Africa talk about FDI. The total FDI inflows from South Africa into India over the last 17 years has been about $433 million, which is a minuscule percentage of total FDI which India has received overall. If you look at the inflows from India into South Africa over the last 9 years, I don't have the comparable figures for the last 17 years, but over the last 9 years, FDI into South Africa from India has been approximately $440 million, which is about 9% of Indian investments into Africa over that 9-year period. The question which, of course, we're trying to answer here is what can governments do, what can businesses do on both sides to really improve access, improve markets, and bring about a real change and faster growth for businesses on both sides and people on both sides as well. Both India and South Africa are very young countries. We often talk about demographic dividend, but youth need jobs on both sides. Jobs are created by private businesses, mostly governments as well, but mostly private businesses, and business is done on commercial consideration. So what can be done on both sides to really quicken the process and make it easier for business and private enterprise in India and South Africa? With me on the panel here today, we've got an esteemed list of speakers. So let me quickly introduce the speakers here. Mr. Rakesh Bharti Mittal is President CII. He's Vice President Bharti Enterprises as well. Mr. Mittal, thanks very much for being here. Mr. Adi Godrej is co-chair the CEO Forum. He's also chairman of the Godrej Group. Mr. Vikramjit Sani is corporate president at the Sun Group. We have Mr. Colin Coleman, who's partner with Goldman Sachs. And Mr. Vivian Reddy is co-chair CEO Forum. On the South African side, he's founder of the Edison Group. Gentlemen, thanks very much, all of you, for being here with us here. Mr. Godrej, let me start with you, and I'm going to ask you to tell us, at the CEO Forum meeting with the trade ministers yesterday, which are the one or two most important things which came about, which needed to be worked on both sides?
Good afternoon, everyone. We had a meeting of the CEO Forum yesterday where there was tremendous optimism. There are several reasons. We discussed many sectors, and there seem tremendous opportunities in all the sectors for improvement in trade and investment between our two economies. But the biggest factor for optimism was that both the countries are being rated quite strongly in terms of improvement in future economic prospects. India is, of course, doing very well. GDP growth rates are increasing. And with the new government in South Africa, everyone felt that both the political background and the economic development would pick up very soon. And most of the rating agencies are also rating both the countries strongly, and there's tremendous interest. There were a couple of problems that were discussed. One is the lack of direct flights from India to Johannesburg. And
we have Mr. Buani Zorana, who's here. He's the CEO of South African Airways, right in queue.
We'd like to request the airlines to quickly restore the status quo ante. The other thing that was also discussed was that whilst there has been a little easing in granting of visas to CEOs, but at the middle and lower levels, when there is so much investment between the two countries, people need to go for longer periods for training, for getting used to the situation. People need to come both ways. And those visas were very difficult to obtain. So since the High Commissioner was there, the government people were there, this was discussed. And I think if something is done to ease that situation,
right,
I think things will move very well. But in short, I would like to just say in one sentence that the future seems extremely optimistic for both investment and trade between our two countries.
Thank you, Mr. Godrej, for that. Mr. Reddy, if I can request you to sort of establish the context from the South African side.
Thanks. If I could just add to what my co-chair, Mr. Godrej, had mentioned, just to tell people about the background of the CEO Forum. In fact, it was a forum that was really the idea of President Thabo Mbeki and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. And the first chairpersons were Mr. Ratan Tata and Patrice Motsepe. And then 2 years ago, Mr. Godrej and myself resumed those positions, having been appointed by our governments. And the CEO Forum actually brings together some top minds, businesses, minds from India and South Africa. And, you know, we discussed the various aspects. Just to go on to some of the issues that we believed, there was a deficit of opportunities available in both countries. And we felt that there was more need for a business-to-business exchanges. And we also, as a CEO Forum, decided we were going to meet more regularly in collaboration with our various business organizations. And the sectors that we really felt were the key sectors that we discussed, and I'm just going to highlight them, was the financial services, where it was felt that both financial communities could evaluate areas of greater collaboration, including South African banks leveraging their pioneering mobile and digital technology advancements, innovation in debt capital and capital raising products, credit guarantee systems, and strong risk management systems and processes, and Indian banks sharing their innovations in the microfinance, rural banking strategies, and underbanked segments. The banks of the both sides could jointly explore opportunities in the African space. We also discussed the mining aspects in detail, and an issue that has come up regularly between the two countries, that of accelerating critical port and rail infrastructure to facilitate greater flows into ever-increasing Indian demand for selected South African commodities. A very hot topic was the infrastructure and energy. And, you know, energy is the key area of collaboration in that of the electricity excess. With both countries battling this issue, there is a potential for joint collaborate and explore efficient technologies, especially solar, biomass, and wind, etc., which can be deployed to enable electric...
Mr. Reddy, if I can interrupt you there. Would you agree broadly that, I mean, Mr. Godrej pointed out longer tenure visas and connectivity. I mean, if you were to drill down into 2 or 3 issues, would that figure right on top? And you also mentioned deficit of business opportunities. Briefly, if you can tell us what did you mean by that?
Okay, the issue of the visas was something that was discussed. In fact, our Indian colleagues have stated that it is easy for Indian executives to get the visas to come into South Africa, very efficiently processed. But when it comes to the technical staff, it becomes very problematic and lengthy. And it is something I'll be discussing it with the relevant minister to try to eliminate that aspect. We know that South Africa has got a situation where we like to have skills, you know, if the skills are not found in South Africa, then you can bring them from abroad, and we want to make sure that South Africans are also considered with the necessary skills in these opportunities.
Connectivity, Mr. Gowani, that brings me to you. Are we going to see, and I think we heard earlier from other speakers before us, the issue of connectivity. Are we going to see a direct flight soon? I mean,
I think perhaps my starting point before I go to the connectivity question is around how India and South Africa should approach the world opportunity beyond just the bilateral trade between the two countries. I think if you look at the area of the fourth industrial revolution, digital future, it's important that the two countries create a platform where the skills, joint skills development, looking specifically at around focusing on creating knowledge base that is future-proof, not from a point of view of India addressing the world versus South Africa addressing the world, but creating a portfolio of skill sets that will see the world opportunity as an opportunity for both India and South Africa. So that's a level of collaboration that's critical, so that South Africa and India is not left behind. We're able to leverage each other's capabilities and the learnings we've had and the history. So that is the one thing from purely the digital future. I think the issue of connectivity, any form of relationship that is commercial in nature in terms of trade has to be facilitated with a strong logistics system, because even in the world of digital, you still have to transport people, you still have to transport goods, but you need to allow seamless flow of information in terms of the trade. So since I joined SAA, one of the key things that's been very, very clear to me is that the Asia-Pacific area, we are underserving it. We're addressing through the Hong Kong entry point. In our view, it's not efficient. So what we then have asked the team to look at is how we address India and indeed we address China. So there are teams that are busy doing market studies, doing analysis as we speak today, trying to look at the most efficient way, that is in terms of the economics of connectivity and direct routes. Those studies are happening.
And at this stage, the teams are working, you said, to assess the potential, right? The potential.
Yeah, we're doing market study. We're assessing the potential to say, how best do we address India, South Africa connectivity? So we have to do the market study, we do the business case, and then it must come out of the wash will come the outcomes. I must say, though, that it's important that this piece of work is not done in isolation. DTI, tourism, trade, that is brand South Africa must be involved, because generally it takes about 18 to 24 months to develop a route if you have left it. So there is a burn factor in terms of the economics. How then do we manage that period of time depending on what the outcome of the business case? So market study, doing market analysis.
Does it look promising though? Can you give us that much?
Can you repeat?
Is it looking promising? Is it look, I mean.
No, it's early days.
It's too early to say, you're saying.
It's early days,
okay.
But we're pushing very fast to get to an outcome. But all I'm saying is that I don't think it's going to be just an outcome that is the SAA and the board coming out with a particular outcome and say, well, it is what it is. I think we have to factor in these kind of conversations, but this can't just be social inputs into the SAA.
Right. There has to be commercial sort of logic
to be very commercial,
to be able to do that, yes.
Yes, and where there has to be a deliberate mechanism to support, to make it work.
Right.
So everyone must have a skin in the game to make it work, and that's why we talk about broader collaboration and
right.
creating a work group with all interested parties.
Sure.
But we're focusing, we're looking at India, we're looking at China.
Sure, thank you for that. I'll come back to you. Mr. Mittal, if you can share with us some of the most important sort of takeaways. You've been in Africa, Bharati's been in Africa for a number of years with a very large $10 billion acquisition of Zain which happened. Could you tell us what are the real challenges operating on the ground in Africa and South Africa in particular that you'd need sort of addressed right away?
Well, let me at the outset say that any time you go out of your home country into the other countries, there are always challenges. It really depends on how the law of the land and how the regulatory system works. And we can only say that, one needs to see a level playing field and then leave it to the companies and the market.
So are you saying there is no level playing field, or there is lesser of a level playing field?
I'm saying this is one thing where you can ensure ease of doing business and attract large-scale investments. Having said that, since I'm leading the industry delegation as the president of CII, 2 or 3, I think, points which I want to make where India is and how India and South Africa can move forward. I believe we are meeting at a very interesting time when, for the first time post-meltdown of economic meltdown in 2008, all the global economies are moving up in a synchronized manner. I think this is something which I see as a very positive. The global economies are moving, the Western world is moving, emerging economies, and amongst that, India stands as a shining star, having exited the 2018 at 6.6%. But I think more importantly, the IMF projections which have come is at 7.5% for the current 18-19. That's one data point. Second is today India is at a $2.6 trillion economy. And by 2025, it'll go to 5 trillion. And 15 years from now, which means by 20, whatever it comes to, we are looking at 8 trillion economy, and that's something which is doable. Some of the successes which I have seen the government of India pushing the agenda on the ease of doing business. I think that is one big area where the governments have worked, where we started ranking these states on ease of doing business. And that has really pushed India 30 spots up to reach at the 100th level in the recent World Bank rankings. And the vision is to be amongst the top 50. And I think we can achieve that. The second, unifying the indirect tax regime, GST, I think has been one major policy initiatives post-independent India. And while we see, anytime you have a big bang policy announcement, there are teething issues which are all behind us. And I only see the economy moving forward. If I look at people sitting here, and since yesterday, I think CII has done an outstanding job working with the High Commission in putting this event together, including the CEO's Forum. And I believe as CII, while we represent the industry, we also need to continuously see that both sides engage, businesses from both sides engage. First of all, I did hear about the air connectivity, two comments. I can only say we don't need to assess any economic viability. There is enough Indian investments into Africa where we send people, every week, every month. And they have to sort of come indirectly through Dubai or
so
any other place.
That is not a problem.
My view is it's a couple of months story. We should see some announcements happening. So while my friend hasn't made any commitment, okay, I believe it will happen because of two reasons. Whenever you start flights, the trade goes up, the tourism goes up. Right. Now, South Africa and India have complementarities, cultural, regional, and I think those are the areas which will automatically see the traffic moving. I can tell you within India, 200 million people fly every year domestically. And as we are moving up the economy ladder, people are moving overseas, flying overseas for their vacation. And I see no reason why Africa should be missed out on that. Similarly, India is a very rich country, varied culture. And I believe that can happen. So having said that, I would just like to talk of two areas. One is on the healthcare. Given India's strength on producing high-quality generic drugs, and we see the same challenges between India and South Africa, this is something which Indian expertise should be made use of to bring low-cost medicine for the people right at the bottom of the pyramid to take that advantage. The second is on agriculture. Complementary seasonalities of growing cropping patterns can only ensure trade both ways. And food processing will be another area. While we have some strengths in South Africa and some in India, if we can pool our resources together, we can move forward. On the infrastructure, while we are moving up in a huge way, South Africa has good infrastructure, but I believe there are opportunities, Indian companies who want to come and invest here, and vis-a-vis the South African companies want to go and invest in India. My suggestion would be that we should actually look at starting India-South Africa Infrastructure Fund, which can ensure that financing is available, long-term financing for infra projects on both sides. And I think that can really be huge opportunities. There are many, but shortage of time, I won't go any more beyond.
Thank you, Mr. Mittal. Mr. Coleman, you worked on deals, large and small. According to you, and you work with Indian companies coming into South Africa, you work with Chinese companies, for example, coming into South Africa. I'm just making that comparison because, in India, we always sort of look at China and what China has done and the potential and where we need to reach in terms of the market, etc. According to you, what are the 2 or 3 things which can really spur investment and trade between India and South Africa?
Market opportunity is where you start. I just say to Mr. Giuliani and Mr. Mittal, maybe Mr. Mittal, you should get your Indian Airlines to look at a stake in SAA. That will fast track and accelerate And Mr. Giovanni needs capital. So you have lots of capital, lots of customers, lots of trade.
And you can make the deal happen.
If you want Goldman Sachs to help you, I'll consider. No, I think seriously, market opportunity is where things start. And ultimately, you know, when we talk about a $100 billion FDI objective, it's a very aggressive, ambitious objective. It's good to have ambitious, aggressive objectives. India is one of the most important countries in the world, certainly the fastest growing, holding up the emerging markets together with China. Fantastic. Africa is the last undiscovered continent in terms of growth. So there's fundamental opportunities between the two, no question. In the China-Africa environment, you know, we've done 3 or 4 very large deals. ICBC Standard Bank was a $5.5 billion transaction. And it's a good example because what happens is 2 private companies, effectively ICBC and Standard Bank, enter into talks. We explore it. Nothing to do with the governments. But obviously they have to brief the regulators. They have to get involved with the regulators. And they have to come to terms on the basis of 2 private bilateral negotiations. So we need those negotiations between Indian and South Africa, or Indian and African companies, to take place and to convert, obviously, after considering the regulatory consequences. In the past, I must say, you know, Bharti MTN was a failed transaction because there were regulatory complexities. So we need to remove the regulatory complexity. I know in the last decade, India has made a huge amount of strides in terms of loosening the regulatory hurdles for foreign companies investing into India, but also India investing into external companies. So I would say there is an environment, I sense, within India and within South Africa for these regulatory hurdles to be much more flexible, much more considered and driven by the need for foreign direct investment and growth in each other's countries. So it's very important that the large companies start to engage with each other and look for opportunities. I must say one of the deals we did for China was Discovery investing in Ping An in a joint venture. It would be good to see more of South African companies investing in Indian companies to use the expertise undoubtedly that exists in South Africa to grow insurance companies or others in India with that very large population. And when you get that reciprocity of South Africans investing in India, Indians investing in South Africa, there's a better feeling between the countries of equality of investment opportunity. And so there too often in the past have been regulatory hurdles about disallowing foreign investment into India beyond a certain regulatory hurdle.
But I think, as Mr. Bagla also pointed out in the presentation, most of this, and you also alluded to that, over the last couple of years, a lot of that has gone away.
Yes.
I mean, most of the FDI which comes into India is now automatic. I mean,
so I think that's what I was going to say, is that a lot of those caps around the sectors, telecommunications, insurance, and others in India have been withdrawn, which is very helpful. So I think we're much better placed now to have deal making, not necessarily the very large scale deals, but that included, because we need to, in order to reach the $100 billion hurdle, which is 5% of GDP. Even if you half that to 2.5% of GDP, it's twice the run rate of FDI we've achieved in the last 24 years. So to achieve that, we have to have the big companies doing deals, but you also want the smaller companies making investments for the big opportunities. And I think with the combination of fundamental growth opportunities in South Africa and India improving, with the combination of market opportunity, technical expertise, and so on, we can see small deals on both sides of the equation and large deals happening.
Mr. Sani, if I can ask you to add your perspective to the discussion that we're having.
So I think I can add that one of the major impediments is the impending preferential trade agreement, because from last, I think, 7-8 years, India is negotiating a preferential trade agreement with SACU, which we hope that with today's deliberation, it should see light of the day. That would go a long way in addressing, in augmenting the sort of a stagnated...
Which is essentially market access.
Yeah, it's a preferential trade agreement on tariffs and so on and so forth, and some early harvest items have been identified. But because South Africa is a SACU custom union, that is an impediment. That's why it's not. That's what Minister Rob Davis said, that he's trying to engage the other SACU countries. So I think that can go a long way. Another thing is the skills, because like we have a fertilizer plant in Richards Bay, we always find the shortage of skills. So I think the skill collaboration in skill development programs, or maybe little liberalization of the visas regime as was envisaged here on the critical skills. And on the visas, I must say that I also happen to be the Honorary Consul General of South Africa to India. So South Africa have started 5 years BRICS visas, and South Africa have granted 5 years BRICS visas to COs, as Mr. Godrej said. But yeah, the need is to percolate down to the SME sector and have multiple entry visas and visa regime. And flight, I don't think the reason for discontinuation of flight was commercial, but because we have, all of us have been traveling on Mumbai, SA, Joburg flight, it was always full, chock-a-block. So I think we need to investigate the reasons we all know were different. It was not because of the load factor, because you can see at the data. At that time, my friend Kaya, Nula, and all others were there. You can dig into the data. The load was absolutely full, but we all know why it happened. But I don't want to get into that. But tourism can be augmented, trade can be augmented, and of course, maybe little bit rand stabilization will also help, because we, as exporter of fertilizers, things, iron ore, chrome, manganese from here, the appreciation of rand also hit a bit.
Right.
So these are the 5-6 areas. Thank you.
Mr. Bagla, Mr. Prabhu on stage said that he's going to ask your team to prepare a blueprint of sorts to be, I mean, agenda items which need to be worked on to push trade between both countries, and what India can do. What's going to be the sort of first couple of things on that list when you start working on the document?
Thanks, Prashant. Actually, we've just solemnized our marriage today. So Yunus is sitting there. We both will start working on getting this relationship going. But you know what's interesting, and it was alluded to, so the big boys have been playing with each other, and I think that will take on more of a momentum. What I also think is that we are all ready for a reset of the economic relationship. What do I mean by that? This is one interaction, which is South Africa and India, which I think is so well founded for the small and the medium enterprise to move with each other. And why I say that is because the most important thing for that segment is the comfort of people knowing each other. And there's such a strong P2P connect.
So what is stopping that from happening right now? That's
So, as I see it, that is what will get more momentum when we'll start seeing the supply chains moving in and making that happen more. And that comfort level with the regulatory thing has already been alluded to. And that's what I mentioned. We are at that point of a reset. Both need each other. There is an interdependence. And there is a reason why capital should flow, because it is going to show results. So as long as there's going to be interdependence and an increasing level of that interdependence, you'll see it flowing. And that, I think, is all very evident. Just look at this hall. This shows the bond where there is.
Absolutely. Mr. Mittal, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, just a quick one. You know, since South Africa is also part of Commonwealth, India, UK did a pre-review audit on the FTAs. And the good thing was that many things got sort of sorted out, which were low-hanging fruit. And it's only the conflict areas where now the engagement will take place, which will ensure that the FTAs are done at a much faster pace. And I was at the Commonwealth Business Forum, and we decided that this will be now shared amongst the 53 member nations, so that this model can be used. You know, otherwise you wait for 8-10 years and things just don't move. I think India, South Africa need to move in that direction as well. And while Invest India is going to lead, I can only say that without the industry support and intervention, it may take a little more time. So CII and its members will always be continuously engaging with Invest India. But more importantly, I can tell you that please see CII as your partner arm in India. Anyone who wants to come and invest, reach out to us, and we'll be certainly providing any help we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think that brings us to a close of this panel discussion. Thanks for your time.